So, Jim, hi. You have been here more than 3 weeks.
Just over 3 weeks.
So, yeah, you've been interviewing people going around to in Donbas. Just tell us what's your impressions?
Oh, my impressions are very much in line with what I expected, except more so. I think first and foremost, it's important for people in the West to understand that this is a region of people who are defending their homeland and who have been involved in a very legitimate and very important struggle for 8 years. They're not involved in a conflict that was created by Putin 2 months ago. They're in a fight for their very existence. And I think the people here are very strong, and I think the people here are very brave. And I've been maybe more impressed by that than I expected. But I understood already the dynamics that were at play before I got here.
So what about the Nazi story and all that stuff? Do you think that there is a problem in Ukraine, or is just Russian propaganda?
There's absolutely a problem with Nazism in Ukraine. I think you hear it from the locals, especially, I mean, we were in Melitopol, we were in Mariupol, which were not places that were involved in the DNR or the LNR in the last 8 years. These are places that were occupied by, well, that were controlled by the Kiev government. And the people that we speak to there tell us very frankly that it was a dangerous place to be, that the authorities who had come in, whether in the SBU or in government administrative positions, had come from the West, that there were anti-Russian laws, and that these Nazi organizations had a lot of reach and a lot of influence. We toured, I think maybe one of the most harrowing places that we went was to a sausage factory that was converted into a prison for the Aidar battalion. We spoke to a prisoner who was tortured there on a daily basis. We saw little dark, cold, damp chambers where 2 people were stuffed into rooms the size of a closet. And I think this kind of practice was very standard there.
So how can you explain the mainstream media attitude to that crisis?
I think that, like, I can certainly speak for the United States, and I think that by proxy Western Europe is very similar, that as powerful as we are in weaponry and in economics, our most powerful weapon is propaganda. And this has been the case at least since the end of the Second World War. And our ability to shift narratives, especially in a digital age, when I don't think people have the level of political consciousness that they once did. The power of propaganda is enormous. And when the Western ruling class decides that something is in their material interest, they're going to advance their narrative at all costs, and it's generally going to be accepted. And this is why we see, I think as recently as 2019, there was even a caucus of U.S. Senate Democrats that petitioned to have the Azov Battalion recognized as an extremist hate group. And then, of course, 2 years later, this was no longer in step with the agenda of the Democratic Party. And so now we have liberals walking around Manhattan singing Free Azovstal. This is the power of propaganda. Yeah.
So, tell us in a few words, who are you, why you have been coming to Donbas?
I'm an American communist. I'm a freelance journalist. I also work pretty closely with a couple of journals there. And I've definitely had a relationship with Russian culture and politics for a lot of my life, so I kept myself abreast of what was going on with Ukraine since Maidan, and also since Russiagate, the story of Russiagate, of the Russian interference in U.S. elections began, because it became very clear to me around then, 2015, 2016, that something was afoot. The story never added up. The U.S. is interfering with every election on Earth. And the notion that, like, a couple of internet trolls sending people memes about Bernie Sanders amounted to significant election interference, this didn't make any sense. But the ruling class, and not just the Democratic Party, but the sort of moderate centrist wing of the Republican Party, really all lined up behind this story, and it made me think that people were gunning for a conflict here. So I've paid close attention to that. And I also think that as a responsible-minded U.S. citizen, anybody who's interested in the liberation of humanity at large has to prioritize opposing our imperialism. And so, because I spoke Russian well enough to get around, to interview people, to understand, and because I had some resources and some wherewithal to get here, it felt like something that I had to do and that I should do, because unlike even Iraq or Afghanistan, where I think, look, the U.S. was able to go in and do what they wanted to do, but there was some dissent in U.S. popular culture about these conflicts. This thing with Ukraine, it was almost universal. The unanimity with which Americans were getting behind Ukraine and posting Ukrainian flags all over the place, about a country that most of these people were unable to locate 2 months ago, was pretty terrifying. And we saw how, not only did this happen, but just weeks later we've created a new Bureau of Disinformation, which is a part of the Department of Homeland Security. We've been censoring people all over Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, for expressing a different position about the war. I think this is incredibly dangerous. And now that we see, laws being enacted against the letter Z in Western European countries, and Soviet monuments against the defeat of fascism being torn down in the Baltics, it's a rise of global fascism in the West, and it has much more far-reaching implications than just a conflict in the eastern part of Ukraine. And those of us in the West who understand this ought to do whatever we can to shed some light on this. How useful that will be in the end, I'm not sure.
So I can see a Z on your clothes. Mm-hmm. Does it mean that you support Putin's war against Ukraine?
I do. And I think that in many of the struggles for self-determination and sovereignty, especially the ones that Western leftists, of which I am one, are very ready to embrace. For instance, the Palestinian resistance, or a lot of the struggles in Latin America or the Middle East at large. If we had someone as brave as Vladimir Putin to step in with a clear anti-imperialist analysis, I don't agree with Putin on every position he takes, but in terms of geopolitics and the U.S. empire, I generally agree with the man. Imagine if Iran or China, they're very far away, so it's not comparable, but maybe Iran is a better example, were willing to come in and invade Israel and end the occupation in Israel. For me, this would be a godsend. And this is what's happening here. This is a people who've been under siege for 8 years. There's a lot of evidence that it was probably about to get worse. And Russia has come in and put a stop to it, and quite frankly, liberated a lot of people from the control of a U.S. vassal state in Kiev. And I think this is admirable.
Thank you for that conversation. Hope to see you sometime again. Bye.
Ciao.